against oppression. Please join me in welcoming Councilmember Kshama Sawant.
Thank you, sisters, brothers, comrades, for being here. I want to start by, first of all, apologizing because I know I'm going to go over the time that is allotted to me, but with your indulgence, because it is not very often that we can bring together a gathering of people of all ages, and I agree with Devan and Celia, young people who want to fight, who have this deep hunger inside themselves to fight against injustice. It's not often that we get this opportunity to get a conversation started, so I'm going to abuse your generosity and speak a little longer, if I may. And I also wanted to say that I will be talking about, I will be making references to some of the things we've done on the council, like the, the sole no vote on the youth jail. But at this moment, I want you all to know that I'm speaking as, as a human being, but also as somebody who grew up in another country, but saw similar situations for a large majority of the population. And I am not saying that the people, the oppressed in India, especially the lower caste majority, I'm not saying that their suffering is exactly a carbon copy of the suffering of the black people in the United States, but there is a same kind of savagery in the brutality that is unleashed on them. And it was that which radicalized me, and I feel like that's a connection between us. Even though I grew up, across an entire ocean, there is this common thread between us, a common thread to fight against this oppression. And there's another aspect of this common thread which is very important for us to recognize, that it is coming, this racism, this brutality that is specifically unleashed against the black community. This comes not from nowhere. It doesn't come out of some strange, wanton cruelty. It comes because it is in service of a brutal global system, capitalism. And it is that very same system, capitalism, that also has been unleashing untold misery on my people, and it is getting worse. And so wherever in whichever corner of the globe we can light the spark of a fight against oppression, we have to grab onto it and we have to make it shine higher. And I'm glad that we're doing that. And Malaka, towards the beginning said that this is not new. Of course, he's totally right. There's nothing new about the deaths of young, innocent black people at the hands of the police. But what is new is that especially young people, but overall a whole community of black people and other social justice activists have chosen this moment to say, not only is it enough, we've all been burning with anger, but let's not just be burning with anger, let's do something about it. And let us take this moment to salute the young black people, not just men, women, trans activists, everybody standing there who have protested every single day since the killing of Michael Brown. That's what we need, that kind of sustenance, that kind of persistence and determination. But what do we need? What does this movement need beyond just the anger that fuels it? This movement also has to be fueled with an understanding of what can take it forward. It's fantastic, the protests that we've had, but you and I both know that's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough even to win the reforms that we want to win, let alone overthrow an entire system, right? There's a whole community of millions of people out there who feel exactly like us, but aren't here with us fighting. And it's our job to bring them in. And what is the best way of doing that? One thing we can do in Seattle, and I know this issue has been debated and I would love to debate it further, but what would be fantastic is if we can bring the separate protests together on some basis of genuine understanding, not trying to wipe out the actual political differences that may exist among different groups, but coming together on a genuine basis. We can have And this is how the civil rights movement built itself into this giant force that changed the course of history. They did it not by isolating themselves from other groups with whom they had certain differences, but they did it by coming together on a genuine basis, by coming to an agreement on some concrete demands that we all agree with, and having feeder marches all throughout the city, and coming together on at a weekly rally that is massive, that cannot be ignored by the media, that will inspire more people to join the next week. And what are the demands these movements can raise? One of the things that we have been talking about in Socialist Alternative, and I know a lot of people have been talking about, is the question of police accountability, just a very basic question of police accountability. Shelley talked about this. And obviously, we all agree that the police need to be accountable to us. So far, they've been accountable. Officially, they're accountable to the mayor and the city council. But if the mayor and the city council offices themselves are part of that establishment that the police serve, then what accountability can we expect? The police have to be accountable to us, and how can we do that? We have to demand democratically elected civilian review committees, oversight committees, committees that will have real powers over the police force, and committees that will be able to decide the training, the rules of conduct of the police department, committees that will be empowered to investigate allegations of police misconduct, including the right to subpoena witnesses. We can expand that, I'm sure. I'm sure there are things that I don't know about that should go into that list. But that is what we need. But how can we win this? In order to win this, we have to also go to the other communities that are also brutalized by the police, the immigrant community, the trans community, the LGBT community. Never lowering the banner of the fight against black oppression, but bringing the solidarity of others who are similarly oppressed. We also need, we can never forget, we need to keep demanding the indictment of Daniel Pantaleo and Darren Wilson. Let that not be forgotten. We need to demand an end to the system of closed grand juries. We need full independent investigations in all cases of police killings. And we need to demand an end to the militarization of the police. Julia talked about how large the police budget is. And by the way, Julia was one of the wonderful people who worked with us on the idea of a people's budget, which has been happening for the first time in this city. And even, I can tell you, ordinary citizens, of course, don't have any say on how the police department functions. But even when you have a council office, the police department doesn't answer to you. We don't know, despite all the inquiries we made, we don't know what they spend the hundreds of millions of dollars on. We do know that they spent $500,000 on police on the Ferguson protests. We do know that even though the SPD chief vowed not to use riot police against protest marches, the riot police were there. We do know that. We need to be thinking about these concrete issues, because the young people who are going to be attracted to a real fight back are going to ask us this question: what are we actually doing? Yes, I want to be there with you, but I want to win something. I want to actually make a change. And so we have to formulate these concrete demands. And we also need to be clear. We're fighting against black oppression. As a socialist, I am also fighting for the entire working class, but we have to reject this idea that we cannot, it's not just black people who are oppressed, everybody's oppressed. You've seen this whole all lives matter thing coming on. And my reaction to that was, of course all lives matter. I mean, who's going to reject that idea? And are you saying that the black community does not have the compassion to understand that all lives matter? Of course they know all lives matter. However, it's important to hold up the banner of Black Lives Mattering, the banner of a fight back against black oppression, precisely because we know that this system directly relies on racism. So if we do want to fight for everybody, we're not going to be able to fight unless we fight on the specific oppressions as well. Where would we have been, my sisters, if the women's movement had not made had not had the victories over years? And yes, we have a long way to go, but we did come far on our own backs because it was activists like us 50 years ago, 100 years ago, fought for us. We have to fight for every layer amongst us that faces specific oppression. Julia talked about, Malika talked about the struggles for basics for the black community like education. How can we fight for everybody unless we point out how this system benefits from those who are the most marginalized? We also have to link our movement against racism for demands for economic justice. Last year we had the MLK Day March, which is a wonderful thing, but one of the prominent messages of the MLK Day was the $15 an hour minimum wage. And we need to make sure that our people, the most oppressed people, are not left out of not only of the material gains that can be made by winning such demands, but not depriving them of being in the leadership of those movements. They have to be at the forefront. Who better than them to talk about their own oppression and knowing how to fight against it? And on that, I'm reminded, just this Monday, we heard that we won a phenomenal victory. How many of you know about the Seattle Housing Authority Stepping Forward program? Do you all know? For those of you who don't know, it was a program that was supposed to, had it gone into effect, would have increased the rents of low-income tenants by 400% over the next 5 years. This was, my sisters and brothers, a ticket to homelessness. And when Andrew Lofton, the head of the Seattle Housing Authority, an organization, by the way, which is mandated with providing low-income housing, came up with this proposal, he came there as if it was all done with, it was just a formality that they were holding these hearings. They did not reckon with the anger of the tenants who not only were angry, but wanted to do something about it. And it was the East African community that played a leading role in fighting on this. And especially it was women. Some of the most courageous activists in that movement were women with whom I could not share a language because they speak Somali and I speak English. And we had to speak through interpreters. But we did speak the common language of fighting against injustice. And our fledgling movement in Seattle needs to link up with other similar movements happening all around the nation and call for a new nationwide black freedom movement. And we need to coordinate national protests against racism, against police violence, against economic inequality. And the message of this movement has to be, this whole system is guilty. We cannot breathe in a system of economic, political, and social terrorism. And the only medicine that can cure our ills is a system change. In Seattle, as others have said, we need to demand police accountability. But as I said, this is a concrete demand. We could win this, but in order to do it, let's be clear, our movement is nowhere close to that. This is inspiring what we're doing tonight, but the reality is our movement needs to be far more powerful than it is today to actually win this. To just give you an example, on Monday, on the City Council dais, I just raised the point about how the police have spent $500,000 trying to control the Ferguson protests, which have been peaceful protests, and trying to target young people, young black people especially, and the excessive use of mace, the excessive use of police force, the excessive number of arrests and intimidation, telling people who are on the sidewalk saying, the protest is over, you can go home now. I mean, this is absolutely unacceptable for the police to do. And when I brought this up, I ran into a wall of opposition from the other council members who were waxing eloquent about how wonderful the police have been, and they're so accountable, and that Bruce Harrell said they're transparent. And I was like, that's news to me, because that's not been my experience. I'm glad Shelley also mentioned Coco, who was punched in the face brutally, and the police have not been held accountable. Celia and Devan talked about the youth jail. And as a matter of fact, we were not the sole vote only on the city council. We were the sole vote on both the county council and the city council. This movement was really active. Youth undoing institutional racism, EPIC, ending the prison industrial complex, European descent, no new Jim Crow. You all have done phenomenal work, and it was because of you that we were able to put this forward. But despite that movement, we didn't get a single other vote. That shows you how much the system is stacked against us, and that shows you how urgently we need to open our eyes and understand that the establishment, the ruling class, the Democrats and Republicans are not on our side. They are not on our side. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this new youth jail, and they tell us they're doing that because the conditions in the current youth jail are bad. Of course, we must demand humane conditions in any detention center, but there is no explanation for why there's hundreds of millions spent on that and maybe a few million, chump change, spent on youth jobs. Why aren't they spending all of that money on youth jobs? So I want to end soon. One of the points I do want to make is in terms of moving forward, I think Will made an important point that we need to have a stronger coalition that comes together on the basis of concrete demands, has weekly protests and rallies where all speakers from all organizations are allowed to speak. There's no censorship. But on the basis that we're all fighting for the same thing, which is a fight back against black oppression and a series of concrete demands that we can fight for here, right here, locally in Seattle. Holding the police accountable, a democratically elected civilian committee. By the way, if you go to the city council, they'll tell you there's already a committee. There is. I mean, they're not lying to you. There is a committee. But it is a committee with no powers. We have to reject that. And if anybody tells you don't accept it, just say, it's not the committee we want. This has no real powers. The police are still not accountable. I mean, so glaringly unaccountable to us. But one of the things we need to be building towards is the next MLK Day. It's only 5 weeks away. It's a lot of work to do if our goal is to have a massive and inspiring and unforgettable rally. That takes a lot of work. And so let's get down to it. I mean, let's take some time off for holidays, but I do need a holiday. But let's come back invigorated to build for that. And what is the ideological basis of what we're doing as well? We're all determined to fight to end black oppression. We're all determined to raise concrete demands like putting a stop to the youth jail, like ending stepping forward, and we've won a partial victory on that. We have all of that, but there's a common thread that runs underneath all of this oppression, and that's the system that benefits from these oppressions. And I wanted to mention how, towards the end of their lives, towering figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were drawing the same conclusions that many of us have drawn, which is which is, as Malcolm X said, you can't have capitalism without racism. The only way the system exists is on the basis of oppression. And what better way to oppress a majority of people by separating them out into slots and having more and less oppression? And I also wanted to share a quote which I'm sure many of you already have read. This is from Dr. Martin Luther King. In 1966, he said, "You can't talk about solving the economic problem of the Negro without talking about the billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of slums." And then you're really tampering and getting on dangerous ground, because you're messing with the captains of industry. And now this means that we are treading in difficult water, because it really means that we're saying something is wrong with capitalism. And I wanted to end on that note, that what brought me to socialism was looking at the untold misery that is being unleashed on the people that where I grew up. But the conclusion I drew from that was not that somehow I have to locally change this and somehow end the oppression of lower caste Indians by not looking beyond that. The conclusion I drew, and I think this is the correct conclusion, is that this oppression cannot be ended unless black oppression is also ended, unless the oppression in South Africa is ended, unless the oppression of the oil workers in Nigeria is ended, unless the oppression of the people in Mexico is ended. We have a common thread running across us. And so I wanted to make an appeal to you all that as we fight to build this movement stronger, please also consider looking at socialism, joining Socialist Alternative, and examining if it fits what you want to do with your life. It just might. Thank you.